Well, this will be different. This is going to be the first time I start one of these videos by describing a bug in the previous release, suggesting a way you can work around it until I get the next release out. At 0.46, I released an interface that supported color in the bed mesh profiles and modified the ABL automatic function so that as you press the load profile button, you cycle through the available meshes. And whichever one is currently displayed is the one for which you can run ABL to repopulate. As I was making this series of videos, it suddenly occurred to me, I don't think I tested this for a new user who receives a printer.config file with nothing in the bottom section where all the saved profiles are stored. I wonder what would happen. And this is what happened when I ran the profile. Let's just have a look at what happens when you get the distribution file in the, let's go down to the clients. In the printer config file as I give it to you, this section at the bottom is missing, right? I take away all the saved config stuff, and when I do it correctly, I hope I never forget to, I come back into here and I take away hash marks that would otherwise be reflected in new values down here so that you have at least a default set of parameters to work from. When you come to do the bed mesh leveling the first time, this section will all be empty. I don't really want to empty all of it, but what I do want to just check is what happens, since I have to do this right now anyway. I'm going to take away the wood mesh profile. There isn't one. It's gone. Right? This section's now empty. I'm going to save and restart. And this would simulate, to some extent, your circumstances. You come to this distribution for the first time. You come to run a bed mesh profile. We come along, we go to calibrate, bed mesh leveling, load profile. No, see, now it says none. Haha. And that's because there is none at the wood leveling. Now, I've told it there's a list of 4. I've told it there are 4 mesh profile names, but when it tried to load the wood profile, it wasn't there. And instead of saying bed mesh wood profile, which I expected it to do, it has instead said none. And the next time I cycle, it goes back to default. So that would be a problem. Let's try pressing run ABL. It is going to run the 95. So I did index the code, so it knows where in the list it is. It knows it's on the 4th member of the list right now when I've scrolled past the others. But now if I generalize this, what's going to happen to you is when you first come to load this, none of the members of the list will be populated, and it's going to say none everywhere. So because the run ABL function is also keeping count of where it is on the list, you could safely press that button at any point as you're cycling through these profiles, each of which says none. Just press the run ABL button and it will run a profile and save it. And it'll have a name. And then after that, as you cycle through load profile, that one will load. And when you run all 4 of them, it'll work exactly the way I show it to you in the rest of this video. Apologies for not having tested it, let's say, correctly. And I will put my thinker's hat on and try to find a way to fix that so that instead of saying none, it should still display an empty matrix. There is no matrix there until you run this profile at least once. But I would prefer that it show the actual bed mesh profile name that you will get if you press run ABL, rather than it saying none because the matrix comes up empty. And that functionality, I think, is part of the inherited code. So I'm going to have to dig a little bit. Anyway, at least it works. Again, I didn't expect that little glitch, so I apologize for any confusion that generates. Hey, so at 0.4.6 of DGUS-Reloaded interface, I have added color coding at last to the ABL mesh points. So now, just like your other favorite interfaces on the CR6 machines, you can tell from the color of the point being either a reddish color or a bluish color as to whether it is too high or too low compared to ideal. And green will define ideal with the exception of zeros, which are white, because I wanted the non-matrix to all be white and not green. I've managed to also change the functionality. So these screens are very small. There's not a lot of room for buttons. And what I've done here, rather than create a series of screens or overlay a series of buttons, I've allowed the one load profile button to cycle now through all of the available profiles. So as you click it again and again, it will go from non-loaded initially to the default profile loaded, and then to each of the profiles in the order in which they appear in a list. I put the list in a file called presets.cfg. Until I figure out how to automatically read your configuration files and populate this array, this list in presets is the only way I could come up with quickly to program the firmware to know what you call your bed meshes and what macros you run to populate those meshes. I have pre-configured it with my own to the extent that you are happy with my meshes and my macros, or you're happy to leave the names alone but just edit them. This will work just fine. So the presets.config file is now in DGUS-Reloaded. I have pre-populated it with the list of macros and bed mesh profile names that come in the distribution as I post it. You are most welcome to make any edits you like. Just be certain that the macro name is precisely correct. Use care to make sure that the profile names are also identically the same. You know, they have to be letter for letter when the firmware does the compare. This is the set that I give you when you take down the current Clipper component and install the machine files, the related changes, mainsail configuration files. And then you can change it any way you like as long as you change this list to match. So you have the load profile button in the top left. That's what you're going to use to bring the existing bed mesh profile, if there is one, in to this display from the printer config. You're going to press the run ABL file to run the macro that normally is used to populate that mesh profile. So current profile here will tell you which profile is presently loaded here. You'll notice right now there's non-loaded because that's the default situation now. When Clipper was modified recently, it no longer loads the default profile by default. So you have to load a profile at print runtime if you expect there to be a bed mesh profile in effect when you're printing. So that's what I do for you. I have provided you with 4 macros. You need to run those 4 macros each to load the profiles so that when you come to print at that bed temperature and the macro says, oh, then you want this profile loaded, it'll be there. Okay. So here's the screen that you can do it from. You can also just do it in mainsail from the console, run the 4 macros, check them with bed height map function. But I've given it to you here now because it was my goal to give this interface the ability to be useful. Up until now, it's just been the functionality that I inherited, more or less, which only worked with default profile because of the way it was implemented, and Clipper not allowing you to use variable names in the save profile settings. So now I've bypassed that, but I've done that by running my macros. You have your own favorite sets of materials. I've now given you the ability to edit the preset heat temperatures and the names of the materials within a 4-character limit. And here I've given you the chance to define your own set of bed mesh profiles and macros, and then operate them from this screen. The only challenge, really the only burden I had to put on you, was to go back to that presets config file and edit the names of the macros and the profiles if you choose to implement something other than what I am giving you in the distribution. You can come in here and take the load profile button. I did debounce it. I gave it a 1/4 second delay between presses, otherwise it just rifled through these things. I've now loaded the default profile, and you can see I've done well enough for my taste. I've defined that threshold to be 0.1 millimeter, and everything was either a 0 or within plus or minus that threshold. If you want a different threshold, you tap on the displayed value. You can enter, say, your own choice. And the value will change there as it happens. Now, the colors are subtle on my screen. I'm not sure if you're capturing it, but there's a cyan value here at minus 0.055 because that's below the 0.05 threshold. But generally speaking, my bed is reasonably flat, even plus or minus 0.05 millimeters in this instance. Now, I can also go load profile a second time, and it pulls up the bed mesh PLA profile in this case. Shows me my color coding's pretty healthy there as well for the 0.05. Just keep pressing it and it cycles through. Now the corners are a bit low because as what happens here, of course, is as the center of the bed gets hotter and hotter, it rises towards the nozzle. But the edges, the corners, are still able to be colder than the middle. They don't rise as much. So in effect, it looks like the corners are going down. But what's actually happening is the center is coming up. The hottest profile, I now have a prominent center compared to the outer edges. All right, so that's how it works. Now, if I wanted to run another one, let me do this from default. It won't go back to none. There's no clear mesh button on here. You can go to the console and type clear bed mesh if you wish, but I didn't put that back in here because I figured you were cycling through these profiles for purpose. And the purpose would be to run, right? So run ABL. It'll tell you which macro it's running, so you can be confident that it really is going to run the macro for the profile that you were displaying. And you know which one to go back and edit if you don't like the results. Running it cold doesn't actually mean chill the bed. It just means I don't turn the heater on. So wherever the bed happens to be when you press this button, if you just run the wood profile and the bed is up at 80 something, beware of pressing run ABL cold because it won't be cold, right? It'll be cooling, but it won't be cold. Cold is the one profile where I don't wait for a 5-minute heat soak first. On the other 3 macros, I do. So you'll see this page regardless of which macro you're running. You get to see check, check, check as it goes around meshing all the points. And as it probes the final point, you'll hear it beep to tell you it's finished, and it will return you to the bed mesh display screen. And there you go. There's your new display. I'd say that's a little bit off where I was before. So good thing I ran the profile a second time. Now you have your choice at this point. You can, if you wish, reject that. Oh, look at my nozzle was dirty. This mesh is rubbish. I should run it again. So you can just ignore anything, say you're running Clipper screen at the same time, it says, hey, shall I save this? Just ignore it or say cancel. And you can press that run ABL button again. It will run the profile a second time. It will discard this one and offer to save the next one. Or you can actually press that red restart Clipper button. Clipper insists that when you've done something that can be saved to the configuration, it will hold on to it. It sets a variable that says save config pending true, and it will not go away. If you came back later and pressed that save config button, it would go ahead and save this mesh because it's already buffered it. The only way to make that go away is to press that red button and restart Clipper, and that will flush the saved profile. It will reset that variable so it no longer says pending, and you can start again from no profile to loading profiles. But if you're content with this one, let's say we're happy, we're glad we ran this again, we trust it because the nozzle was clean, the bed was cold, and still this is what we ended up with, then we press save config. It announces that it's saving the configuration. It does actually restart Clipper also, because that's part of the Clipper function for saving a profile, saving a configuration change. It has to write that to printer.config, then it has to read printer.config again to take in the new values. So you can navigate back now. We're back to no profile loaded. You load profile and there's the new one saved, right? So that is the new functionality in a nutshell. You can run any of your profiles the same way. If I were to say load profile bed mesh PLA and say run ABL, it will now run the ABL macro for PLA. And this time, because there is a heat soak involved, it will tell you that it's heating the bed. Now, these messages only last 20 seconds. I didn't make this one persist for the 5 minutes, but it's a 5-minute heat soak. If it warranted, it occurred to me I could also come up with a 5-minute countdown timer. I just know it's going to frustrate people if it doesn't start the probing when the clock hits 0. So I've delayed implementing such a thing until I can give it some careful thought. This will now soak for 5 minutes. You can see the bed temperature in the bottom right of the screen there. You know what the target is, so you can trust that it's going to heat to the right value. You can monitor this in the mainsail client. On the dashboard, where it tells you the time of day and what the temperatures are, and when you see the heater bed get to 5, because you can slide this around, right? You see the time scale changing and so on. When the heater on the bed gets to 60 degrees, it will wait 5 minutes and then initiate the probing. And of course, you'll know when it's initiated the probing because you'll see it go. And that's it in a nutshell. This is the new bed mesh leveling functionality introduced at 0.4.6 of DGUS-Reloaded user interface. I'd love to have feedback on what you think of it, whether it was a good thing, a bad thing, could have been better, features you'd like to see added to it, nuances that confuse you or whatever. Comment on this video if you like, or initiate a discussion on the repository. Talk to you again. Bye-bye.